Innovation. When I say that word, you think instantly of what? Technology, right? Apps, the cloud, software, big data, things that maybe we didn't all get trained to do, maybe not in our wheelhouse. Whatever innovation is, we know it's really important. If you search on the Harvard Business Review website today the word innovation, you'll see more than 8,000 entries. That means there are at least 8,000 articles or tools that we have created, generated, and kept up for people to see in the years that Harvard Business Review has been online. It's so important that a survey by McKinsey, the global consulting firm, last year suggested that 84% of global executives said innovation is extremely important to the future of their company. But 94% of those people said they were dissatisfied with their company's innovation performance. Whatever innovation is, we know it's hard, and we know we all want to get better at it. But what if you're not great at technology? What if that's not your thing? Is innovation really just about technology? Well, I'm going to share with you a story where the hero of our tale is the humble dining room table. So a colleague and friend of mine who worked on the book with me that Catherine mentioned earlier was working for a condo building company in the Detroit area. And they had built some really nice condos that were well-priced, 2-bedroom, with the aim of attracting downsizers, people who should be ready to move out of their homes. They had all the mod cons, stainless steel appliances, granite countertops, all the things you think that they would want. And they were built all around the greater Detroit area, not right in downtown Detroit, in nice locations. But they weren't selling very well. They had a lot of people come to the condos, but they never converted, didn't frequently enough convert to a sale. So they tried to figure out, what are we doing wrong? We have to figure out who this ideal buyer is so we can market better to those people. So they brought in people for focus groups. What would you like to see in these condos to make you convert to a sale? Well, there are lots of ideas. We want bay windows. We want squeakless floors. We want a downstairs room, a room for the kids, grandkids to come and play. They had a huge list of things that they would love to see in the condos that would convert them to being a buyer. So they did all those things. They created model units that had everything people told them they wanted. People came to look. Lots of people came to look. But not enough of them converted to a buyer. So my friend and colleague tried a different approach. He asked the people who had bought already, tell me about the journey. What got you here to making the decision to move into this condo? They were trying to see, was there a common thread? Was there an ideal buyer? Was there a demographic, certain income level? Had they come from a particular part of the Detroit area? They couldn't find anything really clearly in common with the people who had bought. Except this weird thing kept surfacing, the dining room table. People would say things like, well, I couldn't move until we figured out what to do with the dining room table, or my niece took it. That made me so much more relaxed about getting ready to move. We were ready to move at that point. Now that's a weird aha, the dining room table. He didn't quite understand what that was until a few weeks later he was sitting at his own dining room table at Christmas. And he looked around and he thought about it for a second. What does that dining room table stand for? Family, memories. Every birthday has been celebrated around that table. In my family, every scratch and ding has a story. That's the time my sister and I used nail varnish and we weren't allowed to, and we tried to cover it up. We made forts under our dining room table. For these buyers, getting rid of the dining room table into the condo where there was no space for it was an overwhelming emotional change for them. So with that insight, they realized they weren't selling condos. They were helping people transition to a new life. So what did they add to the condos to appeal to these buyers? Nothing. What they took away 20% of the second bedroom to make space for a dining room table if they really wanted to have it. In their model units, they put in these chunky old dining room tables that looked like something probably should best go to charity, but people recognized as the kind of dining room tables they had had in their own home. They did raise the price. Why? They added in 2 years free storage, or priced in storage, and they put in a sorting room on the premises. So you didn't have to make the decisions about what to keep and what gets discarded in the process of deciding to downsize your life. They didn't make the condo units better. They better understood what those customers needed to accomplish to be ready to move into the condos. So in a market that had a 47% drop, those condo units improved sales by 25%. Now, why am I telling you a story about a dining room table in condos? This has been a question, leads to a question that I've been working on for the past 2 years with the Harvard Business School professor called Clayton Christensen. Some of you may know him, he's famous for what's called the theory of disruptive innovation. He's been trying to figure out why are companies so bad at innovation? Great companies run by smart people consistently underperform in innovation in almost any measure you can think of. The vast majority of innovations actually are not successful. You hear about the ones that are, but there are so many things that don't survive to make it into the market or disappear quietly after a year. He's been spending 20 years himself trying to answer that question, and his aha moment came when he was asked to participate in a project where helping a fast food chain figure out why they were selling milkshakes in the morning. Didn't make any sense. Who buys milkshakes in the morning? But a couple of the particular stores were selling milkshakes really well in the morning. So the team went and observed who came and went. What can we notice that's common about the people who buy the milkshakes every morning? They went and looked, and it was really hard to see. They drove all varieties of cars. It wasn't wealthy people. It wasn't poor people. They were all ages. They could find no common thread to what made people buy a milkshake in the morning until they thought of the question a different way. They stopped people and said, if you hadn't got a milkshake today, what else would you have done? And they got a sort of weird set of answers. Well, I might have brought a banana in the car. You know what, that's good enough, it's healthy. But you know what, a banana peel smells after a while. I don't like having to get rid of it. It's gone really quickly, you can't really peel it. Or I might have bought a Snickers bar. My wife doesn't like it, but I can sneak it and crumple it up. It takes long enough to eat it. I enjoy that. It's kind of a treat in the morning. Donuts are really good, but they're sticky. They went through all the list of things that they might have bought or purchased instead of a milkshake. And then they asked the question after that, what job did you hire that milkshake to do? That's a funny question, but if you think about it, there's an answer to that. In this case, they concluded the job that people bought a milkshake for in the morning was help make my commute more interesting. I have a long commute. That's the best solution for it. It's enough to divert me through some of it. I can use one hand to drink it. It's better than all of the competitors, milkshake, the bananas and Snickers bars and donuts. If you think about the job that people hire innovations to do in your life, it changes everything. That's the primary thesis of Clay Christensen in the book that we've worked on. People don't buy products and services. They hire them when there's a job to be done in their life. When you think about this from the innovation from the perspective of jobs, it changes everything. You're not competing against all the things you imagine you're competing with. Bananas are competing with milkshakes. It changes the landscape. It changes what you think you're solving for in trying to create better innovations. Let me illustrate this for you. This is a PlayStation, Sony PlayStation 4. Who do you think is Sony's biggest competitor? Possibly. Possibly. Xbox is what almost always gets mentioned. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, they were both coming out with new versions. And in the paper, you could see on a frequent basis a side-by-side comparison of the price, all the features and benefits, who was doing better in the Christmas sales. In what world is this a competitor to PlayStation? In mine it is. Or this. These are competing to be hired by someone like me, and possibly you, for the job of help me relax after a stressful day at work. If you don't even know what you're competing with, how can you be the superior offering? You're not just competing with the traditional categories of things because people are hiring you, your product or service, to fulfill a job to be done in their lives. Now, we have a very specific definition of a job. It's not just intended to be a cute term that sounds like just a generic term for innovation. We think jobs are specifically the progress that a person is trying to make in a particular circumstance. And you have to understand both the progress they're trying to make and the circumstance to innovate successfully for that job. But what's critical is they don't just have functional dimensions. It's not just trying to get something done functionally. Very important social and emotional dimensions as well. You've all hired this conference for a reason, and it probably has social and emotional dimensions that are quite important and far beyond the function of, I want to be in a conference room all day learning about developments in in-house lawyering. Illustrate this for you. How do you feel when you see this image? This is a typical doctor's examination room, right? It's completely functional, perfect for a doctor to come in, quickly examine you, probably has everything the doctor needs outside of the picture of this. The social and emotional components of the job to be done here are far more significant than the functional ones. No patient would ever design a room like that, right? You sit on the crinkly paper, you already feel kind of vulnerable and anxious. The window's closed already. You hear people walking outside the door in kind of hushed tones, and you sort of, are they coming, are they coming? And you're sitting in, sometimes in the Johnny, you feel vulnerable. This room makes people feel vulnerable. You would never design this room from scratch if you were thinking about the job to be done from the patient's perspective. And the reason I use this particular example is in the course of working on our book project, we talked to the head of innovation at a huge healthcare chain in America called Intermountain Healthcare. And he had overseen dozens and dozens of innovation projects in his career. And he said until the moment that he sat on a table like that as a patient, he was getting his knee surgery, preparing for some knee surgery, it hadn't even occurred to him that the innovations that he created, which were often software, would have emotional and social components as well. The difference between having a doctor turn away from you to type into a computer and a doctor keeping eye contact with you the whole time are enormous to the patient. Tiny gestures that connect with people emotionally at a moment when they're feeling vulnerable. Jobs to be done are not just functional, they're social and emotional. To illustrate an unusual job to be done, this is an air mattress in a spare room. Who on earth would say this competes with hotels? It's not better. This is certainly not better than a hotel room. Well, you will not be surprised when I say Airbnb, which in December was given a $24 billion valuation. That's because Airbnb isn't, or at least in the beginning, isn't competing with hotels. People hire an Airbnb for very different reasons than they would hire a hotel room. I'm staying in an Airbnb for this trip to London. And there's no reason that you could guess, based on my demographic or me standing here, why would I choose an Airbnb when I could have stayed in this beautiful hotel? Social and emotional. I used to live in London. I don't like to feel like a tourist when I come back to a place that I lived. I want to stay in my old neighborhood. I want my kids who are with me to be able to see their friends. Our Airbnb is certainly not nicer than this hotel, but the far more important dimensions of what I was hiring for were social and emotional. Where do you find jobs to be done? This sounds great, but how do I see them? How do I recognize when people are trying to solve something in their lives? You look for what people are struggling to accomplish, and you often see it with crazy workarounds or non-consumption, choosing to do nothing rather than hire something that's inadequate for the job. Think back to our condo buyers. People did not move homes, even though it was far less work to be a retired person in a beautiful condo unit with a clubhouse and a pool and all the things that you get from being part of a condo association. Non-consumption. I'd rather suffer with what I have than choose something that doesn't really solve the job to be done for me better. Workarounds. People doing crazy things to try to solve problems should be a real clue to you that there's an opportunity to innovate something. Look for struggles. People are struggling to make progress in their lives, personally or professionally, and you can help them solve those. Great example is QuickBooks, which I know I saw on somebody's football kit recently, watching football over here. Founded by a company, Intuit, company that is famous for Quicken, which is personal financial software. The co-founder of Intuit, a guy called Scott Cook, told me that for 4 years, they ignored the fact that many of their customers told them that they were jerry-rigging Quicken, the personal financial software, to use for their small business. He just thought they were people who were cheap or didn't want to look at the very sophisticated accounting software that was already on the market, because what was on the market seemed very good to him. It was so sophisticated, it created books almost like a professional accountant would for you. But for 4 years, they didn't pay attention that constantly people said they were doing this crazy workaround with Quicken to use it for their small business, until it finally clicked. The job to be done for many people is not create sophisticated books that look like an accountant did it. The job to be done is, I don't want to have to do this at all. I don't want this to be hard. I want to make sure money comes in and money goes out. I don't want to have to hire someone to do it. The job to be done was to make this as painless as possible for me. Functionally, QuickBooks, this is Scott Cook's quote to me, half the functionality of the options that were already in the market and twice the price. It was the market leader in just a few months after launching and has continued to be so. In fact, what Intuit's working on now, they're so focused in on the job to be done for their customers. Their job they were working on the form you fill out for TurboTax, which in America, I don't know if you have it here, is you fill in blanks and it basically generates your tax return for you. And every year they would add questions to the TurboTax form, chapters I think they called them, depending on what level of taxes you were trying to file. And every year they were looking for the perfect combination of questions to ask to generate perfect tax returns. And they got longer and longer. And then they started thinking again, what's the job to be done for these taxes, for tax returns? The job to be done is, I don't want to have to do my taxes. I don't want to sit there and put in 100 answers to 100 questions. That's very stressful for me. That makes me anxious. What if I make a mistake? The job to be done is make my taxes done without me having to worry about it. So now they have a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal of doing taxes for people without them having to put that information in. That's crazy. How do you do that? Well, guess what? They're starting down the path of figuring out how do we get permissions from the pay stubs, the companies that do paychecks. How do we get permission to get access to your investments and things like that? Can we auto-populate a lot of this information for you so you start with something that's closer to being done and we can minimize the questions for you? The goal, and I think they may get there, is make this job to be done easy for me. The progress I want to make is I don't want to have to be stressed out about my taxes. I want them to be accurate and I want them to be filed on time and I don't want to have to do them. They're on their way because they have focused on the job to be done, not the functionality of their product. Sometimes the job to be done is removing obstacles from people who are trying to make progress doing something. These are actually pictures from a company called Medtronic, which makes medical devices company, which makes pacemakers, among other things. And they were trying to introduce pacemakers into their Indian market, which should sadly be a really ripe market for pacemakers because of the prevalence of heart disease, but not many people were getting pacemakers. And they created fabulous pacemakers, and the doctors who implanted them thought they were terrific. There was no question. But it turned out for the people who were actually getting the pacemakers, it was an overwhelming thing to think about. How do I navigate the medical system for a pacemaker? A lot of it's personal payment. How do I get the money to do the pacemaker? How do I navigate through the various hospitals? So Medtronic focused not on the pacemaker itself, which was a superior product, but how do we remove the obstacles for both doctors and patients to getting these pacemakers in? They did things like set up free community clinics where people could come and be diagnosed for whether or not they were at least a candidate for it, compared to some of the doctor visits that people traditionally would have, which would be 30 seconds or a minute. And a pacemaker may never come up in that. So they created free clinics. They created positions in the hospitals they called Sherpas, where the Sherpa's job was to help people navigate the system, from the financial aspects of it to the medical care before, during, and after the surgery. They took away the anxiety from people who were trying to decide whether or not pacemaker would save their life, or in the case of a lot of the patients, their family's life. It turns out that families felt incredibly responsible for the elders, and they wanted to make sure they had the money so that their elders always had the opportunity to get a pacemaker if it would be better for them. They found ways that had nothing to do with the innovation itself to make it more successful by removing the obstacles. So now I ask you again, from this perspective, how can you be more innovative? I really haven't talked about technology at all. Yes, the Intuit product is a software product, but most of what I'm talking about has nothing to do with having the skills to program something or create something high-tech. It's understanding people and the progress that they're trying to make in its full functional, emotional, and social components. That probably changes things from your perspective dramatically. Help me make progress. Think about your job. There are lots of ways that people around you are trying to hire you in your department to help them make progress. And they're probably not all or even primarily functional. They're looking for emotional and social jobs to be done well as well. Does your CEO hire you to give definitive, perfect legal advice? Or does he hire you so he can sleep well at night? Does he hire you because he doesn't want to be the person second guessing everything? Does he hire you or she hire you so they won't go over the edge? Do they hire you because you are the truth teller? You have to know the answer to that question if you're going to be effective at your job. You can innovate in 100 ways that have nothing to do with a keyboard if you understand the progress people around you are trying to make. If you want to be an innovative general counsel, you have to have an answer to this question. What jobs have you been hired to do?